Good morning, everyone. I am Aliyah Claire Cabrera
and Justin J. Pilvera.
will discuss to you the topic in Chapter 6, which is validity. So in previous chapter, we talked about reliability. Now, in this video, we're going to talk about validity. Types of validity, which is face validity, content validity, criterion-related validity, and construct validity.
And lastly, the validity, bias, and fairness.
Now, according to the book, reliability and validity are closely related concepts, but they mean different things. So, pag ang measurement, pwede siya maging reliable without being valid. However, if a measurement is valid, it is usually also reliable. So, as a refresher, if we talk about reliability, it is how consistently a method measures something. If the same result can be consistently achieved by using the same methods under the same circumstances, so the measurement is considered as reliable. However, if we talk about the concept of validity, nag-state ni siya sa legitimacy sa isa ka test. So if musturya ta about something na valid na adjud na basis about atong imuhang gistorya. So for example, ang mundo ay bilog. So what do you think? Is it valid or invalid? So the answer is valid kay there are evidences nga nagsupport ana na statement. So if moingon ka na ang mundo ay flat, so somehow invalid siya, though na ay mga evidences nga mugawas, but dili jud siya totally legit nga pwede nga makasupport sa imuhang statement nga giingon. So, same po sa psychological testing and assessment. So, according sa book, validity is a judgment or estimate of how well a test measure what it purports to measure in a particular context. So, pwede nato maingon na valid ang test pag daghan tag evidences to back up sa mga gi-claim niya or sa gi-measure niya ang construct or variable na gusto niyang sukaton. So, in short, question nga ginasagot sa validity kay does this test what it intends to measure? So, why should we answer that question? Because ginagamit man good ang mga test para sa mga importante na decision making or other purposes. So, importante jud nga ang mga resulta na mogawa sa isa ka test kay naka-base jud og evidences para matawag nato siya og valid or legit. So now, validation. So, validation is a process of gathering and evaluating evidences about validity. So, in order for us to determine invalidity sa isa ka test, meron ay napud na siya process nga ginabuhat. So, both test developers and test user have significant role in the validation of a test. So, ang tawag sa process nga sa pag-validate sa isa ka test ay validation studies. So, kani siya kay ginabuhat sa mga test developers sa early phases ng test development. So, there are times na the test developers created local validation studies. So, kapag gusto nilang malaman if valid pa rin ang test, kahit na naanay ka ng mga gamay na changes or modification. So, for example, kapag mag-translate ka og isa ka test from English to other language, syempre, kailangan i-recheck gihapon nimo ang validity sa isa ka test kapag naanay mga changes na sa mga items or sa mismong grupo ng mga test takers. So, next is to have types of validity or ginatawag po siya na traditionally conceptualized validity. So, this Trinitarian view believes that evaluation of validity focus on how well a measurement quantitative value represent the attribute of being measured. And the second one is how well the measurement gives relevant scores to what the test is trying to measure. So we have to understand that these types of validities are not mutually exclusive with each other, and actually they contribute to a unified picture of a test for validity. So dili siya competing ideas, di sad siya choice kung magkandak lang ka og content validity, criteria related validity, or construct validity. Kanita yan, all of these types of validity kay nag-contribute siya para sa isa ka klaro nga image kung gaano ba ka-valid ang isa ka test. So critics claim that kani daw siya nga approach is fragmented and incomplete. So, in this time, let's discuss content validity, criterion validity, and construct validity. Three now classic approaches to judging whether a test measure what it purports to measure. So, first is face validity. So if we say face validity, it relates more to what a test appears to measure to the person being tested than to the test actually measures. So basically, ang face validity is a subjective judgment or kanang ang first impression ba sa isa ka test. Like, sa unang tingin ba kay mura ba gina-measure ang construct na gusto niyang i-measure? For example,
kung IQ test ang test, mukha naman bang intelligence yung mini-measure niya? Usually, nakukuha ito sa presentation. Importante syempre na sa unang tingin pa lang ay mukha ng legit ang test. Parang sa mga online shops lang yan, di ba? Kapag nakita natin na mukhang bogus yung online shop, ang hirap pagkatiwalaan.
so same pod sa test, importante pod ang face validity, pero naapod ba saying nga don't judge the book by its cover. Maong tan-awon pod nato og unsay naa sa isa ka test or ang content validity.
So next is content validity. Is a judgment of how adequately a test sample behavior representative of the universe of behavior that the test was designed to sample.
So content validity assesses whether a test is representative of all aspects of the construct. So to produce valid results, the content of a test, survey, or measurement method must cover all relevant parts of the subject it aims to measure. So, pag naay mga some aspects nga are missing from the measurement or mga irrelevant elements nga na-appeal, so the validity is threatened. Like, for example, a mathematics teacher develops a algebra test for her class, so the test should cover every form of algebra that was taught in the class. Pag naay mga some types of algebra nga wala dito wala na appeal sa iyang exam, so the result may not accurately indicate students' understanding of the subject. So similarly, if she includes questions unrelated to algebra, the result are no longer a valid measure of algebra knowledge. So kadalasan when we create a content validity or we create a test, so magbuhat pud ta og test blueprint. So the pictures shows an example of test blueprint. So the example is a test and curriculum development. So ang test blueprint kay mo na siyang map of objective that are assessed in the test, as well as a map of the different levels of learning that each question addresses. So nasa gibuhat nga kaning four nga objectives that are assessed in this test, and they are first is develop aims from the needs assessment, second is develop goals, third is develop standards, and fourth is develop objectives. So these four objectives are assessed at one of three levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So these levels are knowledge, comprehension, and application. So kani siya nga test is na gi-organize ni siya para makita kung ang how his or her students perform these four objectives at the knowledge, comprehension, and application levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So, the second type of validity is criterion-related validity that evaluates how closely the result of your test correspond to the result of a different test. So, what is the meaning of criterion? So, it is a bit more narrowly as the standard against which a test or a test score is evaluated. So, a criterion daw is an external measurement of the same thing. So, it is usually nga kanang established or widely used na nga test that is already considered na valid. So, giunsa pagsukat ang isa ka criterion-related validity. So, ano siya? Need nimo og isa ka existing na test na mo measure sa construct na gusto nimo i-measure sa test na gina-develop pa nimo. So, sa criterion-related validity, kailangan nimo og duha or at least two tests. So, unsa ning duha ka test? So, first is katong test nga gina-develop pa nimo, ug ang ikaduha kay katong isa ka test na establish na ang validity. So, for example, a university professor creates a new test to measure applicants' English writing ability. So, para ma-assess na nimo siya how well the test measures students' writing ability, so, nangita siya og existing test that is considered a valid measurement of English writing ability and compares the result when the same student take both tests. So, if the outcomes are very similar, so that the new test has a high criterion validity. So, remember na ang measurement or in order to measure the criterion-related validity ng isang tool, so need nimo og existing tool. In some cases where there are no existing tool to measure the same construct, so possible nga ang imong gamiton nimo na tool kay mo measure sa construct na highly correlated or construct na duol sa construct na gusto nimo sukaton.
So now, I'll give you another example para mas masabtan pa jud kung unsa ang criterion-related validity.
whatever the criterion, ideally it is relevant, valid, and uncontaminated. So now let's talk about the characteristics of a criterion. So first is criterion is relevant. By this, we mean that it is pertinent or applicable to the matter at hand. So we would expect, like for example, that a test purporting to advise test takers whether makashare sila the same interest of successful actors to have been validated nga using the interest of successful actors as a criterion. So second is criterion measure must also be valid. So for those people for which it is being used, if one test is being used as the criterion to validate a second test, so then the evidence should exist that the first test is valid. So if the criterion used is a rating made by a judge or a panel, then the evidence should exist that the rating is valid. And the last is a criterion is also uncontaminated. So let's talk about the criterion contamination. Is the term applied to a criterion measure that has been based at least in part on predictor measures. So how can we say nga contaminated ang isa ka criterion? So sometimes criteria do not represent all of the dimensions in the behavior, attitude, or event being measured. So when this happens, the criterion has decreased evidence of validity based on its content because it has underrepresented some important characteristics. So if the criterion measures more dimension than those measured by the test, we say that the criterion contamination is present. So when criterion contamination does occur, the result of the validation study cannot be taken seriously. So there are no methods or statistics to gauge the extent to which criterion contamination has taken place, and there are no methods or statistics to correct for such contamination. So there are two types of criterion related validity. So first is the concurrent validity, is an index of the degree to which a test score is related to some criterion measures obtained at the same time or concurrently. So the concurrent validity measures how well a new test compares to an well-established test. So para mas masabtan pa or mas mahibalaan pa kung unsa ang concurrent validity sa isa ka test, so I'll show you some example na nasa PDF.
Concurrent validity. Para malaman ang concurrent validity ng isang test, ang ginagawa ay i-administer ang isang test. Ginawa nila ito sa pagbavalidate ng Beck Depression Inventory 2 sa mga adolescents. Dati kasi ginagamit lang ang BDI sa mga adults at hindi sure ang mga clinicians if applicable din ng BDI sa mga adolescent. Kaya ang ginawa nila ay i-administer nila ang BDI-2 sa mga diagnosed adolescent kasabay ang isa pang established instrument sa pagdadiagnose ng depression sa mga adolescents. Lumitaw na valid ang BDI-2 for adolescents dahil mataas ang validity coefficient or correlated ang scores ng BDI-2 sa isa pang established instrument na ginawa nilang criteria.
So the second type of criterion-related validity is predictive validity, is an index of the degree to which a test score predicts some criterion measure. So kani siya is ga-state kung gaano ka-accurate ang scores ng test sa pag-predict ng isang criterion measure na related dito. So for example,
kapag ang isang college admission test ay napipredict ang grade point average ng isang student, ibig sabihin ay mataas ang predictive validity ng college admission test.
Judgment of criterion-related validity, whether concurrent or predictive, are based on two types of statistical evidence. So the validity coefficient and incremental validity. So So first is validity coefficient is a correlation coefficient that provides a measure of the relationship between test scores and scores in the criterion measure. So, it means that it is a gauge of how strong or weak that usefulness factor is. For example, let's say your research shows that a student with a high GPA should perform well in the SAT and in college. So, a validity coefficient can tell you more about the strength of the relationship between test results and your criterion variables. So, the second one is incremental validity. So is a predictor's ability to explain an outcome beyond all the predictors. So for example, assume predictor A of 25% of the variance in an outcome of interest and when entered separately. So predictor B also accounts for 25% of the variance. So because their influences most certainly overlap, it is also important to understand the amount of variance each predictor explains when considered in conjunction with the other. So, in one scenario is that predictor A and predictor B account for the much of the same variance. So, predictor B can be said to have low incremental validity because it adds very little new information to the prediction equation. So another scenario is that their variances overlap very little. So predictor B can be said to have high incremental validity. Although incremental validity is conceptually simple and straightforward, it becomes difficult to estimate in practice for several reasons.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, ma'am. So let us proceed to the next topic for this chapter, the construct validity. So what is construct validity? It is the degree to which it attests measures what it claims to measure. It is also a judgment about the appropriateness of inferences drawn from the test scores regarding individual standings on a variable called a construct. So I will be giving an example for a better understanding of what is construct validity. But before that, let us first know or examine what is a construct. A construct is an informed scientific idea developed or hypothesized to describe or explain behavior. Constructs are unobservable, presupposed traits that a test developer may invoke to describe test behavior or predictive performance. So I have given here examples of constructs, namely job satisfaction, personality, but bigotry, clerical aptitude, depression, motivation, self-esteem, emotional adjustment, potential dangerousness, executive potential, creativity, and mechanical comprehension. These are all examples of construct. I have given here an example of construct validity. So this example is a reference, a maple cake reference in stock cake. So let us take a look at satisfaction of my maple cake. So ang construct na to ani is ang satisfaction. Now, satisfaction may include a variety of factors, but here in this example, we will be defining or describing satisfaction as by presentation and the taste of the cake. So let's say for example na mag-create a survey on satisfaction of my maple cake. So for example, in my survey, the question goes like this: how did the maple cake taste on a scale of 1 to 5? So answer ang participant, 5. Bigyan na siya sa taste. Let's say my survey ended there. I could have had an excellent tasting maple cake, but it could have looked like parang hindi kaya-aya ang presentation. So may pasagutan na. The survey would have neglected physical appearance of the cake, thus presenting poor constructability. Ano naman? Because the operational definition of satisfaction of my cake includes both taste and physical appearance. So, ang tama ang tatong buhaton, the right way is, ang question ngayon mo ang butang sa imong survey is, how would you rate the cake on taste? Rate 1 to 5. And how would you rate the cake on its base of appearance? So, paagi ani, ang imong construct na satisfaction kay i-measure niya ang both ang taste ug ang appearance. So it can be called valid. Atong test is valid. So now that the operational definition of satisfaction of my cake matches the concept it represents with appearance and taste, we have good construct validity. Traditionally, construct validity has been viewed as a unifying concept for all validity evidence. As we noted at the outset, all types of validity evidence, including evidence from the content and period-related varieties of validity, come under the umbrella of construct validity. Let's look at the types of evidence that might be gathered. So we have here evidence of construct validity. A number of procedures may be used to provide different kinds of evidence that attest as construct validity. The various techniques of construct validation may provide evidence for example. First evidence is the test is homogeneous, measuring a single construct. So when describing a test and its items, homogeneity refers to how uniform a test is in measuring a single concept. For example, some attitude and opinion questionnaires require respondents to indicate level of agreement. For example, strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree. Each response is assigned to numerical score, and items that do not show significant Spearman graph order correlation coefficients are eliminated. If all test items show significant positive correlations with total test scores, then each item is most likely measuring the same construct that the test as a whole is measuring, and is thereby contributing to the test homogeneity. So, next evidence is the test scores increase or decrease as a function of age, the passage of time, or an experimental manipulation as theoretically predicted. So some constructs are expected to change over time. Reading rate, for example, tends to increase dramatically year by year from age 6 to the early teens. If a test score purports to be a measure of construct that could be expected to change over time, then the test score too should show the same progressive changes with age to be considered a valid measure of the construct. So for example, mag-conduct of examination regarding vocabulary or spelling ba na. Tapos, na pang grade 6 or pang elementary level. Tapos, ang mga mag-take is mga college students. So, college students. So, kay ang test na gihatag is pang elementary na. Tapos, ang mga nag-take is higher years, which is college students. So, we would expect that the scores of the test takers will mas dako. Mas dako yun siya kay. So let's go to the third evidence. Test scores obtained after some event or the mere passage of time or post-test scores differ from pre-test scores as theoretically predicted. Evidence that test scores change as a result of some experience between a pre-test and a post-test can be evidence of construct validity. Some of the more typical intervening experiences responsible for changes in test scores are formal education, course of therapy or medication, and on-the-job experience. So, of course, depende sa construct na gina-measure almost any intervening life experiences could be predicted to yield changes in scores sa pre-test o sa post-test. For example, basta ka inspirational na libro, kanang ka TV show, other samples are undergoing surgery, serving a prison sentence, or the mere passage of time may each prove to be a potent intervening variable. So, the fourth evidence is test scores obtained by people from distinct groups vary as predicted by the theory. Also referred to as the method of contrasted groups as a way of providing evidence for the validity of a test is to demonstrate that scores on the test vary in a predictable way as a function of membership in some group. So scores on the test vary in a predictable way as a function of membership in a subgroup. The rationale here is that if a test is valid measure of a particular construct, then ang test scores from the group of people would have be presumed to differ with respect to that construct should have correspondingly different test scores. Consider in this context a test of depression, wherein the higher test or score, the more depressed the test taker is presumed to be. We would expect individuals psychiatrically hospitalized for depression to score higher on this measure than a random people na testimony. We have here the fifth evidence, the convergent evidence. Evidence for the constructability validity of a particular test may converge from a number of sources such as other tests or measures designed to assess the same or a similar construct. So, for example, we want to measure aggression or construct is aggression. And ang pangako is we will go out in the park and dito ta measure sa taong aggression. So, ang first method is through questionnaire. So, natagin ito questionnaire sa mga tao para iakasigan para mag-test at pag-measure ng aggression. And they also decide now we will also use another method of measuring aggression, which is through observation method. So convergent evidence is when test takers gets high scores on the questionnaires, the first method, and they also got high scores on the second method, which is on the observation. So that is convergent evidence. They converge even when using two different methods. These methods give the participants both high scores on each. So we're gonna put it this way: different methods measuring the same construct should give scores that are correlated. So the sixth evidence, discriminant evidence, a validity coefficient showing little statistically insignificant relationship between test scores and or other variables in which scores on the test being construct related should not theoretically be correlated, provide discriminant evidence of construct validity. So let's go back to the example of the number 5, convergent evidence. In here, we are worried na we are also measuring other constructs. Now, we are worried that our observers are picking up or measuring another construct. Dili lang aggression. So, for example, misinterpret nila ang kakiat sa bata o kakiat sa katao, pagka dagandagan, pagka energetic, as a part of aggression, which is actually not. It is another construct na, that is energy level. So ang atong baton na para ma-address ni is we would tell the observers na to observe also the level of the energy level, and also the aggression. So after that, the same method ko ng bato na nag-i questionnaires na observation method, but the observers are now tasked to observe aggression and energy level, or mag-assign na kaglaing tao na mag-observe sa aggression, or bihay po tao na mag-observe sa energy level. So after ang makuha na scores, when we compare the scores given sa observation method of the text questionnaires, theoretically dapat dili ta makakuha og scores na related muna ipasabot sa discriminant evidence, or in other words, it's also called divergent validity. So we can put it in a way na the same methods measures different constructs should gives us scores that are not correlated. We have here multi-trait, multi-method matrix, an experimental technique useful for examining both convergent and discriminant validity evidence presented in 1959. Here, let's simply point out that multi-trait means two or more traits, and multi-method means two or more methods. So this means that measured constructs should correlate more highly with measures of similar constructs than measures of different constructs. For example, we have the construct optimism and self-efficacy. So we are expecting that these constructs should correlate highly. On the other hand, we have construct self-efficacy and anger. So we are expecting that these constructs should correlate weakly. We also have here factor analysis. Both convergent and discriminant evidence of construct validity can be obtained with the use of factor analysis. Factor analysis is a shorthand term for a class mathematical procedures designed to identify factors or specific variables that are typically attributes, characteristics, or dimensions of which people may differ. So, ang purpose sa factor analysis is to identify the factors in common between test scores on subscales within a particular test, or the factors in common between scores on a series of tests. In general, factor analysis is conducted on either an exploratory or a confirmatory basis. So we have a diagram here showing that we have 6 observed variables, namely waiting time, cleanliness, staff behavior, taste of food temperature, and freshness of food. So we analyze the factors para ma-narrow down to sila into 2 factors, which is the first 3 variables are under the factor of cleanliness, and the 4th, 5th, and 6th variables are under the factors of food quality. So that is only an example of factor analysis. Exploratory factor analysis is estimating or extracting factors, deciding how many factors to retain, and rotating factors to an interpretable orientation. But on the other hand, confirmatory factor analysis. In this analysis, researchers test the degree to which a hypothetical model, which includes factors, fits the actual data. We also have here factor loading. A term commonly employed in factor analysis is factor loading, which is a sort of metaphor. Each test is thought of as a vehicle carrying a certain amount of one or more abilities. So factor loading in a test conveys information about the extent to which factor determines the test scores. So a new test purporting to measure bulimia, for example, can be factor analyzed with other known measures of bulimia as well as with other kinds of intelligence, as well as with other kinds of measures such as measures of intelligence, self-esteem, general anxiety, anorexia, or perfectionism. High factor loadings with a new test on a bulimia factor would provide convergent evidence on construct validity. Moderate to low factor loadings with a new test with respect to measures of other eating disorders such as anorexia would provide discriminant evidence of construct validity. So let's move forward to the next topic for this chapter: validity, bias, and fairness. So in the eyes of many people, questions concerning the validity of a test are intimately tied to questions concerning the fair use of tests and issues of bias and fairness. Let us hasten to point out that validity, fairness, and test use and test bias are three separate issues. It is possible, for example, for a valid test to be used fairly or unfairly. We have here test bias. We all define bias differently. For the general public, the term bias as applied to psychological and educational tests may conjure up many meanings having to do with prejudice and preferential treatment. For federal judges, the term bias as it relates to items on children's intelligence tests is synonymous with too difficult for one group as compared to another. But for psychometricians, bias is a factor inherent in a test that systematically prevents accurate, impartial measurement. So we have here terms that is very understandable by you guys. So first is rating error. This is the intentional or unintentional misuse of scale. Mali na paggamit sa scale. Leniency error, tendency of rater to be lenient in scoring. It is error ni siya kay, for example, ang nag-rate kay very lenient lang, very loose lang sa inyo ha. So this could be an error. Next is central tendency error. It is the tendency to be giving rating at either positive or negative extremities. So it is an error by it is an error because ang test scores na mahatag niya is either extremely positive or extremely negative. So the next is halo effect. It is the tendency for some raters to see no wrong among ratings. So that is very understandable. So the last part of this chapter is Test fairness. We will define fairness in a psychometric context as the extent to which a test is used in an impartial, just, and equitable way. True. Some tests, for example, have been labeled unfair because they discriminate among groups of people. The reasoning here goes something like this. Although individual differences exist, it is a truism that all people are created equal. Accordingly, any differences found among groups of people on any psychological trait must be an artifact of an unfair bias test. Fairness is applied to tests is a difficult and complicated subject. However, it is possible to discuss some rather common misunderstandings regarding what are sometimes perceived as unfair or even biased tests. We would all like to believe that people are equal in every way and that all people are capable of rising to the same heights given an equal opportunity. A more realistic view would appear to be that each person is capable of fulfilling a personal potential. But again, although a test is not inherently unfair or biased, simply because it is a tool by which group differences are found, the use of test data, like the use of any data, can be unfair.